Chapter 8. Thursday. Raven stared down at the empty clothing in her hands. A moment ago, a child had filled them, but now there was nothing. Screams flooded the air around her, and she looked up to see the other women staring, as she did, down at nothing. "Gemma? Has anyone seen Gemma? Calvin? Calvin, where are you?" The shouts of names grew on top of one another, creating a cacophonous noise until they drowned each other out. Raven dropped the clothing and focused on the car that had burst through the front glass windows of the gym. She limped over to the driver's side. The man inside had blood streaming down one side of his face, and his lips mumbled something, but she could not understand it. With a gasp, the image faded, and she sat up and looked around the dark room. The unfamiliar dark room. This wasn't her bedroom. There were no black curtains, no landscape photos. So where was she? And then it came back to her. Jason, after hearing her story the night before, had offered his couch, and Raven had taken him up on it, not wanting to return home. She clicked the button on her smartwatch to illuminate the screen. 4:30. Too early. But like the previous nights, she wasn't sure she was getting any more sleep tonight. She might as well go into work early to catch up on what she had missed due to the meeting yesterday. Raven scribbled a quick note to Jason to explain where she'd gone before heading to the bathroom to catch a quick shower. He'd offered it to her last night and even left a towel out for her, but she'd been too tired to take it then. She would enjoy the warmth now, though she wished she had another pair of clothes with her. Perhaps she could stop by her place just long enough to grab something. The thought of returning home still filled her with dread, but she couldn't show up to work in yesterday's clothing. That would create gossip she didn't want or need. She peeled off her clothes and stepped into the warm shower. His water pressure wasn't as good as hers, but the effect was the same. The heat from the water poured into her body, waking her up and dispelling the last remnants of darkness. Maybe she should try a shower before bed, or warm milk, something to calm her brain before she fell asleep, so that she could avoid these dreams. What had that dream even been? A child disappearing? A car crashing through her gym? The gym was on a main road, but it sat a good 20 feet from the road and up a curb. A car would have to be going pretty quickly to come barreling in the front of the gym like that. She turned the water off and dried off before pulling on her clothes again and sneaking out of the house. Darkness still coated the landscape like a thick black ink, and Raven's heart steadily increased its pace. What if someone was hiding in the shadows? What if the dark shapes were there watching her, just waiting for the perfect time to attack? Her eyes closed for the briefest of seconds. She had to get a hold of herself. Only crazy people thought they saw dark shapes or imagined people lurking in the shadows, and she was not crazy. She repeated that mantra as she drove to her apartment, but it didn't slow her heart rate down any as she parked her Jeep and turned off the engine. What if someone had gotten inside while she was gone? Had she even remembered to lock the door in her haste to leave the night before? 10 minutes. She just needed 10 minutes to grab some clothes. It was such a short amount of time, but her heart refused to understand. Her feet dragged on the pavement as she forced herself toward her front door. The locked handle gave her a slight reprieve. At least no one had gotten in this way. She unlocked the door and pushed it open, letting the little light from outside spill into the living room. Nothing appeared to move, and the laughter she had heard the night before was silent now. Imagination. That's all it had been. Her brain repeated that message as she flicked on every light on the way to her bedroom. Yes, just her imagination. Perhaps with an imagination like hers, she should leave coding and write books. If she could scare herself this much, what could she do to readers? Raven's shoulders slowly relaxed as she changed out of the old clothes and into a new outfit. How silly she'd been to not want to come home last night. There was nothing here, nothing to worry about. This was her apartment, her refuge. She was safe here. She checked her hair and makeup in the bathroom mirror before heading out, but though she had almost convinced herself of her safety, she did not glance at anything other than her reflection in the mirror. Nor did she let her eyes wander as she made her way back to the front door, locked it behind her, and continued to the car. 45 minutes later, Raven entered the building where she worked. The lobby lights were on, but the place felt cold and empty. The first shift began at 7, so other than the night watchman, there was no one else in the building. She liked it that way. enjoyed the quiet. Normally. Today, however, she wondered if the quiet would allow her mind to play more tricks on her, to make her think she was seeing things that weren't there. She waved to the watchman who sat behind the receptionist's desk on her way to the maze. It wasn't really a maze, but the rows and rows of cubicles always made her feel as if she were in one. It was not her ideal workstation, but thankfully her cubicle was near the back and away from most of the traffic. She dropped her purse under the desktop and powered on the computer. Might as well catch up on the email first. The promotion she had put in for was supposed to be announced any day, and she would really enjoy an actual office with walls where she could block out the annoying conversations that often flowed around her. A moment later, her screen glowed, and her computer hummed softly. Raven clicked to the email server and waited for it to load. There it was, the email announcing the promotee at the top of her inbox. She clicked the email and felt her jaw drop. Frustration surged within her. She'd been passed over again? This job wasn't rocket science, and she'd been doing it for the last year. So why did everyone around her keep getting the promotion she deserved? She knew her attitude could be abrasive at times. People had been kind enough to tell her that on more than one occasion. But she could also turn the charm up when she wanted. Besides, she worked in coding. She didn't need to be nice to people. She just needed to be able to write and repair programs. And she could. She was good at it. Her eyes fell to the bottom of the email where the lucky recipient was listed. Cindy Berkowitz? Really? Cindy wasn't bad at her job, but she was annoying, chipper and smiley like Kat, the sunshine of the department. Probably a Christian, too, if the cross she wore on her neck was any indication. Irritation rose in Raven at the thought of Kat again, and she slammed her hands on the desk. Cindy had stolen her job. Now Kat was stealing her gym? True, Jason had let her stay the night last night, but he'd seemed immune to her charms. And though he hadn't, Raven had sensed he wanted to talk about Kat. She had to find a way to stop her. Movement in the corner of her eye grabbed her attention, and Raven looked up to see a shadow flit across her computer screen. Not again. Her head whipped behind her, but there was no one there, just rows of empty cubicles. Nothing else moved in the large room. What was going on? She'd been seeing way too many of these dark shapes to dismiss them as hallucinations from lack of sleep, and she was getting dangerously close to overdosing on sleeping pills if she kept upping the dosage. Maybe Kat was a witch and had cursed her. Could that really happen? Raven shook her head. She'd been watching too many supernatural reruns. That kind of thing didn't happen in real life, right? Just to be sure, she decided to call out and see if anyone or anything responded. Hello? As her voice echoed in the room, she thought of every horror movie she had ever watched. How many times had she yelled at the girl on TV not to call out, but to run? Yet here she was doing the same thing. Raven stood up and scanned the room more closely. She hated the cubicles. Not only did they make her feel like a mouse in a trap, but someone could easily be hiding in one now. And without peeking over every wall, she would never know it. Is anyone there? Silence blanketed the room as her voice stilled, almost like that eerie quiet after a snowfall. But this wasn't comforting like the sight of the delicate white flakes. No, this felt quite different, chilling even. The hairs on her arm and the back of her neck lifted as if coaxed upward by some unseen hand, and that was enough for Raven. There might not be anything physical in the room, but something was definitely off. Suddenly her phone began ringing. Even though her ringtone was a song and not a shrill ringing, the sudden sound of it breaking the silence made her jump. She snatched it out of her pocket, hitting the call button as she did. Hello? Her voice sounded breathy and scared, and her eyes continued to scan the room as she waited for the voice on the other end to speak. Raven Ryder? The voice was deep and masculine, and not one she recognized. You tell me. You called my phone. I need you to come to my office. It is imperative we speak. His office? Who was this, and why was he calling on her cell instead of the office phone? In fact, why was he even in the office this early? She was only here because of the nightmares and the need to be doing something besides sitting around and jumping at shadows. It was possible he had work to do, or perhaps, like her, he enjoyed the silence, but she'd never seen a boss here this early before. "Who is this?" She hated how shaky her voice sounded, how weak. "Room 144. If you value your job, you will be here in under 10 minutes. Raven was about to argue with the mysterious voice when the phone went dead in her ear. "Hello?" She knew the word was useless at this point, but it slipped past her lips anyway. Great. Now what did she do? She had no idea who had been on the phone, but he was creepy. However, the black shapes and whatever was in the room with her here might be even creepier. With a resigned sigh, she jammed her phone back into her pocket, grabbed her bag from under the desk, and hurried out of the cubicle maze. Though she felt eyes on her as she walked, she did not turn around. The fear of what she might see kept her jaw clenched and her gaze firmly in front of her. The tense feeling ebbed as she stepped into the lobby. Perhaps it was the openness of the room, or the early morning sunlight now filtering in the large windows that dispelled the fear. She honestly didn't care, as long as it was gone. She turned left to exit the building but stopped. The elevator called to her like a silent beacon. What if the guy was real? What if he was one of her bosses? She couldn't afford to lose this job. Her eyes flicked to the receptionist desk. She could ask the watchman if anyone else was in the building, but the desk was empty. He must have run to the bathroom or to grab a bite of food. Of course, the one time she needed him and he wasn't at his post. Raven bit her lip as indecision held her rooted to the spot. Her eyes glanced from one door to the other. Finally, she shook her head and turned toward the elevator. She hoped she wasn't making the biggest mistake of her life. The silver doors opened, reminding Raven of mechanical jaws. She had to stop watching so many horror shows. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the circular number 1, but she forced herself not to jump when they slid shut and the car began to move. When they opened again, she scanned the area for signs. She'd only been on the first floor once, when she first got hired. The ground level of the building contained the lobby, the cubicle maze where she worked, the kitchen and break area, and bathrooms, so she rarely had cause to go anywhere else. The floor above contained the offices, of which Raven had only been in 2, her immediate boss's office for the interview, and the human resource office to fill out the necessary paperwork. Raven had no idea what was on the other floors, as she'd never felt the need to investigate. According to the sign, room 144 lay to the right. Raven hadn't even known there were that many offices on this floor. It didn't seem that large, but maybe they were numbered oddly. Her mother's street had been that way, numbered every 3rd number instead of every number. When she reached the designated room, she raised her hand to knock, but before her hand even touched the door, a voice called out, "Come in." Her hand froze in the air. How had he known she was out here? Perhaps this wasn't safe after all. No one even knew where she was. This guy could be some crazy man who snuck in and planned to gut her, or worse. But if it were some random guy, how would he have known her cell number? Stupid, 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 played over in her mind, but she pushed the door open anyway. The office wasn't large, nor was it opulent. In fact, it had a bare-bones feel to it. No pictures or plaques adorned the walls, and they were devoid of color. In fact, the only color in the room was on the man himself. His jacket was dark, but his shirt was a vivid blue, accentuated even more by the blandness of the room. "Hello, Raven. I'm Micah. Nice to meet you." He did not stand, which only unnerved Raven more. She'd never seen this man before, and something about him seemed off, but she couldn't place what it was. Am I in trouble? She hated beating around the bush. Better to jump right in and find out what they had on her. It was obviously something, because she couldn't imagine why she would be called here if it wasn't. A flicker of something flashed in his eyes before his stoic demeanor took over again. "Your job is not in jeopardy." She blinked at him. That hadn't been her question. "You are here because you saw something." I saw something? Raven made it her point to see nothing, hear nothing. She avoided office gossip like the plague. What television show aired the night before or who was dating whom did not matter to her, and she could not force herself to engage in idle chatter. "At the meeting yesterday, I was informed you behaved oddly. Your superiors decided that perhaps a few counseling sessions could help." He spread his hands out. "I am that counselor." A counselor? Was he crazy? She wasn't telling anyone about the black shapes, least of all this guy whom she didn't know from Adam and who spoke like a robot. Yeah, thanks for the offer, but I'm all good. I was just tired, burning the midnight oil and all that. His head tilted slightly and his forehead furrowed as if he didn't understand her metaphor. It is not a request. You have been assigned sessions with me in order to retain your job. We can begin the first one now. Raven scanned the room for cameras. This had to be a joke, though she could think of no one who would pull such a joke on her. No one here knew her well enough or cared enough about her to pull a joke. You're saying if I don't talk to you, then I'm fired? He shrugged. I believe you will find me easy to talk to. As if compelled by his words, Raven suddenly found herself wanting to talk to him. She sat down in the chair across from him, barely noticing it was a folding chair and not like the rest of the furniture in the building. She placed her arms on the desk, oddly devoid of any clutter, pictures, or writing utensils, and stared at him. I've been seeing shapes, black shapes. Even as the words left her mouth, she couldn't believe she was saying them aloud to him, but she seemed unable to stop. It was as if her mouth was under some kind of spell. Micah folded his hands together and nodded. And do these shapes have form? Do they have faces? Faces? She leaned back in the chair. Was he crazy? No, they don't have faces. They're just shadows. Probably just my mind playing tricks on me. But every time I see them, I feel as if someone is watching me. And have you told anyone else of these shapes? Did he think she was an idiot? Talking about black shapes that didn't exist would most likely get her fired and labeled as crazy. Neither of those things was high on her to-do list. No, I haven't told anyone. I'm not insane. However, she was beginning to have her doubts about him. He hadn't even flinched when she told him about the shapes. Just kept up with that same robotically calm demeanor. It may be important to talk to someone about what you are seeing at some point. For now, you can continue to share your concerns with me. Now, shall we talk about your stepfather? Her stepfather? How did he know anything about her stepfather? It wasn't like that was in her file. Was he trying to psychoanalyze her? I'm sorry, is this counseling or therapy? His steely eyes bore into hers. Is there a difference? Yeah, there is. Counseling can be mandated by my employers, but it would only pertain to whatever was affecting my work. Therapy cannot be mandated by my employers, and that is where talking about my stepfather would fall. You said I had to attend these sessions? Fine, but I'll only talk about things that might affect my work, and my stepfather is not one of them. Again, his head cocked like a parrot when it listened to someone speak. You do not believe that what your stepfather put you through when you were young affects your work now? Okay, this had just gone from weird to downright creepy. No one here knew about her stepfather. In fact, no one other than her mother knew, and her mother was usually too stoned to care. I don't know who you are, but this counseling session is over. Raven stood and began walking toward the door, but before she reached it, Micah's voice froze her steps. The time is short, Raven Ryder. You need to come to grips with your past so that you can affect your future. The fate of many lay with you. She turned to face him. I've made peace with my past, and the only person's fate that I have control over is my own. His lips curled into a tight smile. We shall discuss this more next time, Raven. I believe your curiosity will get the better of you. Raven doubted that, but even as she left room 144, she found herself wondering what he had meant about her future. What did he know that she didn't? And why did it seem as if he thought someone else knew as well? Kat held up her hand as a bright light illuminated the locker room. Raven. It had to be. The angel on her shoulder was brighter than most, but Kat wasn't ready to talk to Raven yet. She still had no idea what to say. The girl had been shooting daggers her direction the whole class, and she'd brushed off Kat's efforts to reach out to her yesterday. Something had obviously happened to Raven, but she seemed intent on keeping it to herself. So Kat had done her best to avoid her. But the locker room was small and there were not many places to hide. Hey, Raven, Kat said, pasting a bright smile on her face as she pulled her watch out of her bag to put it back on her wrist. It was painful to wear her watch with boxing gloves on, but she felt so naked without it that it was the first thing she put on after every class. Are you okay? Why do you care? Raven asked as she dropped her gloves in her bag. Kat sighed and sent up a silent prayer for help. What could she say to get Raven to open up to her, to allow Kat to at least say the words she needed to? She aimed for a nonchalant tone, adding a shrug with her words. What can I say? I'm a caring person, and I know you saw something yesterday. Raven's posture stiffened, and her eyes took on a cold, steely glare. I don't know what you're talking about. I saw nothing other than you throwing yourself at Jason. Or is it John this week? Kat bristled at Raven's insinuation. She had no desire to date any of the men here. They all seemed nice enough, but Micah had made it clear that Kat's mission came first. You've got it all wrong, Raven. I'm not here to hook up with anyone, and I heard you scream. I know you saw something. Tell me what you saw. Raven ignored the last question, but her eyes roamed Kat's body from head to toe with a critical gaze as she began unwrapping her wrists. Then why are you here? I mean, no offense, but you don't look like you could take anyone in a fight. You look weak. Kat mashed her lips together to keep the hateful words simmering in her brain from pouring out of her mouth. Raven was lost, hurting. She needed to remember that. But it was hard, so hard, especially with her spouting off about things she couldn't understand. I came because I needed a place to focus my anger. My best friend died recently, and I was having trouble dealing with it. I met Jason at the bar he works at one night, and he recommended this place, this workout. So I didn't come here to hook up with him or anyone else. I came here to channel my anger so I didn't explode. Kat took a moment to take a calming breath. Why do you hate me so much anyway, Raven? You don't even know me. Raven scoffed and tossed her wraps into her bag. I don't have to know you. I've known enough people like you. You play this sweet, innocent card until people trust you, and then you reveal your true colors and shove the knife in. Kat shook her head softly. She could only imagine what lay in Raven's past to make her so wary. What happened to you, Raven? What happened to make you so hard? Nothing happened to me. I'm too strong to let anything happen to me, but I've seen it plenty of times. Raven pulled on her zipper with an angry yank and then picked up her bag. You should just do yourself a favor and find another gym. You're not welcome here. Kat stood and slung her bag over her shoulder. I can't do that, Raven. Oh, how she wished she could. She was beginning to wonder if talking to Raven was even possible. Why not? Because I'm not done yet. Raven's brows pulled together and she looked at Kat as if she were crazy. Done? With what? Training? You're never done. It's a lifestyle, not some crazy fad. Kat shook her head. She didn't want to say any more. Raven already thought she was loony, but she could feel the gentle pressure on her heart urging her to continue. No, not with training. With you. With me? Raven's eyes snapped up to lock with Kat's. What do you want with me? I don't swing that way if that's what you're after. What? Kat shook her head as a wave of embarrassment swirled in her stomach. No, it's not like that. I'm supposed to talk to you. Raven popped out her hip and pursed her lips. Talk to me? About what? Kat inhaled deeply. Raven was probably about to think she was even crazier, but she had to try. About what you saw out there. About your future. Raven's body tensed and her jaw clenched before a loud, hoarse laugh spilled out of her full lips. My future? She shook her head, and Kat couldn't help but notice that she had once again skirted the issue of what she'd seen. That's ripe. What are you, some kind of fortune teller? Yep, this was going about as good as Kat had expected. No, not a fortune teller. Not exactly, anyway. Raven's eyes narrowed and her posture shifted. Every muscle in her body appeared to tense as she glared at Kat. Oh no, you're one of those religious nuts, aren't you? You're here to tell me all about Jesus and how my soul is in danger? Kat cringed at Raven's tone and gripped her bag tighter. It's not like that. Yeah. Okay. Raven rolled her eyes and hiked her bag up higher on her shoulder. I think I'll pass. I'm maxed out on crazy. Raven, wait. But it was too late. Raven had already turned and walked out of the room. Kat could chase her, but what would be the point? Her job was hard enough now with Raven's admission of hatred for believers. What was she supposed to do with that? With a sigh, Kat waited another few seconds to make sure Raven was gone before exiting the locker room. She'd have to keep praying and hope God opened a door for her. Raven glanced over her shoulder as she pushed open the side door to the gym. She needed to be sure Kat wasn't following her yet. The 5 o'clock class was just starting, so there was a stream of people standing between the bags and stretching in her sightline, but she did not see the dark-haired girl among them. Good. It would give her time to get to her car and wait for Kat to exit. She needed to know what the girl drove. Unfortunately, as it was summer, the sun still shone brightly overhead. Were it winter, it would already be dark by now, and the shadows would conceal her, but no such luck. Plus, her car would be hot and steamy, uncomfortable to sit in too long without cracked windows or the air conditioner on. Hopefully, Kat wasn't too far behind her. She yanked open the door of her Jeep and climbed inside, shutting her door just as the side door opened again on the building. With a hiss of frustration, she ducked down as far as she could, while still maintaining a visual on the door. Kat emerged a second later, and without glancing around, she walked to a blue Mini Cooper. At least she had good taste in cars. Raven had always wanted a Mini Cooper, but not one off the lot. She wanted to be able to order it to her specifications like they did in the movies. And there was a website where you could do that. But Raven would never be able to afford the price. She wondered what Kat did. Was she an heiress like Paris Hilton, or did she actually work for her money? If Raven had to wager a bet, she'd guess the latter. Kat seemed too earnest to be a stuck-up heiress. But there lay the quandary. If Kat was earnest and truthful, then did she know something about Raven's future? Or about the dark shapes Raven kept seeing? Should Raven at least let her talk before completely dismissing her as a quack? No. She'd known too many hypocritical Christians in her time. Heck, her stepfather had been friends with one of the greeters at the church. That hadn't stopped him from taking a turn with Raven when she'd been offered up. The Mini Cooper hummed to life, and Kat pulled out of the parking lot. Raven ducked down further in her seat until the Mini was out of sight. Then slowly she exhaled and sat up. Now she knew what Kat drove. The question was, what did she do about it? Jordan stared at the text message from Jeremy, not believing her eyes. She'd met Jeremy on her flight from Texas to Washington a few weeks ago. He'd been like her guardian angel, easing her anxiety and helping her out in the crowded airport, which had been odd because ever since the night of her rape, she'd had trouble trusting men. Heck, she'd had trouble passing them on the street without her heart hammering out of her chest and her palms turning into a sweaty mess. It was like she suspected every guy she passed might try to pull the same stunt. Drug her, rape her, and then disappear. Jeremy, however, was different. He'd been planning to work with his father, so they had separated at the Seattle airport, but they'd kept in touch through text the last few weeks. Last night, she had texted him about her plan to return to Texas, though she hadn't mentioned why. Her son was still one of the many topics they had yet to discuss. They'd shared some personal information, both at the airport and in the time since. She knew a little about his caring family. He knew even less about her overbearing and critical mother. But her son, and the circumstances around his conception, was a topic she didn't share with many people. Only when it was required to convince people of her gift did she speak of him, and she hadn't even shared her gift with Jeremy. So how odd that his text message stated that he was heading back to Texas as well. Was it possible they would meet again? When are you leaving? Her fingers flew over the keys, but she didn't really think they would be lucky enough to be on the same flight again. What would be the odds? As she waited for the buzz of her phone to tell her that he had responded, she packed what little clothing she had brought with her back into her suitcase. How odd that God had sent her all the way out here to reach Kat, and now it almost seemed as if he were sending her back. Couldn't he have used someone closer? She knew his ways, like his timing, was not for her to question, but it was odd. Of course, it could be that this wasn't his way at all, but her own selfish desires clouding her judgment. But she didn't think so. She'd spent most of the night praying about it after talking with Kat, and the only decision that gave her peace was going home. The phone buzzed and she snatched it up, swiping the screen as she did. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Jordan nearly dropped the phone. That was her flight time as well. With shaky fingers, she tapped out her next message. What flight? United 762. This time, the response was nearly instant, as if he were waiting by the phone for her response. United 762? Her flight? But how was that possible? She hadn't even planned on going back, yet somehow she was booked on the same flight as the one man she had connected with in the last year. Jordan didn't believe in coincidences, but she found this disconcerting. Who was Jeremy, and what was his connection to her? She didn't want to text back, but it would be rude to leave his text unanswered. Guess I'll see you tomorrow then. But did she want to? For the first time since meeting him, she found herself feeling a little afraid.